There are certain things that you yourself don't know if you can do until you get reading or you find something that speaks to you. There are roles out there which, yeah, you hope one day to get the chance to kind of excavate and not have to settle for some guy's girlfriend. Which is why I always end up killing people in films instead, because that's preferable.
Filmmaker Magazine presents Back to One with Peter Rinaldi.
Imogen Poots is an actor. She sat down with me on the Upper West Side of Manhattan to talk about the work.
You land the role, you get the script. What's the first thing you do typically to get your arms wrapped around the character?
Well, it depends on the project. I wouldn't say I've ever followed a stringent routine, apart from the basics of reading and rereading the material again and again and again, and seeing what comes to you. But often, until you're with your other actors or in the costume, or it can be quite hard to even imagine what you're getting into. You often need those, I always think of it like tennis, you need your kind of tennis players to help you figure out what your position is in the whole machine. But certainly, you know, researching something, depending again on the role, like with something like a play, you can research the playwright a ton. Maybe there's evidence and there's little clues to be found there that will help you with your character. Or with a film, sort of what's the point of your character in that? What are they there to do or say, if anything at all? So I guess it's always it's starting from somewhere, but yeah, there's no specific rules.
And I learned that you didn't really have any formal training.
That's right.
Like, I was shocked when I heard that, because I just thought that your work feels so like tuned, but it's not. But that almost sounds like it's not alive. I mean, like, to say you're just a natural, which would be the thing that if someone's not trained, they're a natural. I don't know if I believe that, because it's too hard.
Well, I guess it's an interesting argument, isn't it? Because it's like, do you go away and do all your work and decide how someone's going to move and sort of what they want from a situation and what are they harboring? But then when you're in, say, with a film, you're filming with your fellow actor, and they bring something that totally derails your thing. I mean, that's the thing, is that ultimately all that matters, whether it's a good thing or not, is in that moment, is it a truthful exchange? And so that's really where you have to live. But certainly for kind of sake of mind and to feel as kind of empowered and like you've done some work, then prior to that, you do go through your kind of unearthing of whatever, and reading and watching and recording. And I always like to make sure I'm getting a big dose of watching lots of films just before something to remind yourself, you know. And then obviously with something like theatre, it's different, because there's just a lot more control there from the rehearsals through to the performance each night. It's just you guys together creating it, whereas the film ultimately is, you can do your work, but who knows what will come of that. So yeah, I think it's just kind of, I hope over time too, often you start, when I think about when I started out, I'm just like, oh goodness me, you child, you know, like, yeah, I was probably coming at the work from an entirely different place. And hopefully that's only deepened over time, is kind of the best way of thinking about it. But
and what about when you get into trouble? You know, people who have had training, they resort to their tools, and you may have your tools.
Right.
You know, But does that come harder because, it's not seeped in this training of being able to reach for that? Is it something that you've just developed?
I wonder. I mean, I always think with acting, it's such a strange... So there's a lot of mystery, I think, to do with it, even to actors, where you can have a good day or a bad day. And, I think just because you did good one day does not mean the next day will be the same. So I suppose it is kind of a self-discipline moment to moment of staying in something, but then often you need to get out of your head and you need to push away and be free and forget whatever you're doing, because that's become stale and predictable and you want to freshen it up and do something different. So yeah, in the sense of like being in trouble as well, that's just something I think you just come prepared for, because you could think, oh, that felt great, and they're like, well, the airplane went over it, or we're losing the lights, so we'll pick it up tomorrow, or someone gets a stomach ache, and whatever, you can't control those things. So I don't think you can ever turn up at work with a sense of safety, everything's perfect for everyone to do their best work. It always seems to be the opposite with filming.
When you can think of a bit of direction from a director that worked for you,
I'd say there's lots of, obviously, people direct in different ways. Something that I've often really appreciated in the past can be quite a clinical direction. So like Peter Bogdanovich will say something like, just do it faster. And it's said with, love and support. It's not just like a dismissive thing. Say it faster, or pick up the teacup. There's something quite specific. Sometimes I quite enjoy that, because then it kind of reins you in. And often they're right, especially with something comedic, it's all about the rhythm, isn't it? Or perhaps take more time, I think moving to a certain place, that can be quite interesting. And then on the other hand, sometimes it's an indirect way, because I guess a lot of directors think, little fragile actors, don't want to make them feel insecure. But I remember Michael Winterbottom on a film called The Look of Love we did quite a few years ago. He would often ask me something about my character's choice of beverage, and in a way it's quite a flattering thing to ask, because it makes you feel like your character's, your character's interests are just as important to the director's. So I think there's quite it put you in a place of at ease and a place of comfort. But it's, every director's so different, and I'd say, I know this is Film Maker magazine, but again with plays you can have some of the best direction I've ever had was in theatre, for sure, because something might work one night with an audience and then you think, oh, terrific, we've figured out that joke, or you think the laugh is the result, but then the director will say, well, now that works, let's try it this way, and you're like, oh, what? Your egos, but actually that's an incredible thing to do, to keep digging, if you have the time, which you often don't with indie films.
Is there ever a time when you just would wish that they just didn't say anything to you?
I mean, sometimes you can come in with an idea and feel pretty certain of it, but normally the certainty is probably just because you've sat with it for too long. And I think the collaborative element is one of the best bits of making movies. It really is, because it's much like life, having that other perspective, whether one of you chooses to go with the other one's idea or not, it's just making sure you're searching. In fact, I think it's that awful feeling you can have with indie film where you walk away and you haven't excavated it thoroughly enough, and you've sort of done a version of it, but that can be very unsatisfying. So I think I'd be worried if someone didn't say anything.
And I should have written this quote down, but I just read you a quote from you about improvisation that was similar to what you're saying here, about how when the improv is not worked out enough, they just live with that version of it there, and it didn't it didn't. It needed a few more go rounds.
Right.
You know, and I've often thought that with improv scenes or films. I'm like, yeah, this was a good first attempt at this. Like, these people should have done it again. But here it is in the film, you know?
Yes, exactly. I know it seems like the scaffolding, doesn't it, of a scene?
Yes, that's a good word, yes.
Yeah, it's a hard thing, though, because I think the filming it's like vomit, I always think. Like, you just sort of, something comes out and maybe someone will find something good in it to use, but it's not really refined in any way, and often that can be a great thing. Sometimes you just share a moment with someone that's perfect, or the director gets that shot with the train going past and the light's brilliant, and you know that can work too. But yeah, it's so unknowable, isn't it? What you're going to walk away with at the end of a day, and again, a lot of filmmakers will have reams and reams of references, like this shot in this Tony Scott film, or this and this movie or this movie, but ultimately it's your film, so what would you like to do?
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean you have to sort of copy that specific framework of Ida, but you should maybe move your figure to the center, or you know, it's like it doesn't have to be
bring down the headroom.
Yeah, like it's great to appreciate that, but it's also important to make it your own, I think. As much as I would like to be like Jack Nicholson, I can't do it.
Do you feel like you have to lose yourself to a certain degree for the performance to be successful?
I think ego-wise, that would probably feel good, but it wouldn't necessarily be the best thing, because you've already worked out your kind of where you are on the moral compass threshold with a character, and I think you always need to kind of be in touch with yourself, for sure. There's a lot of kind of conversations, I'm sure, between yourself and that person's decisions. But I said something when I was younger that haunts me, because people say, when you were 17 and you were really wise. I said something about I never personalize anything, and I think that's total bullshit. Of course, there are parts of you in every character, and every character perhaps gives you something to take away. But I think you always want to have that point of access, and otherwise you could go too big, lose the point of what you're trying to say.
Talk to me about mobile homes. Tell me how you got involved with this film.
I was sent the script, and I immediately just responded to how feral she is as a person, or was rather, and just the nature of the script between her and Evan and Bone, her kid. It was just a very elemental piece, and seemed to ask a few questions, but the protagonist is certainly unlikable, and I thought that was interesting. Too many times you read a script and the breakdown is like, she's kind of a bitch, but she's charming. It's just like, no, this girl is a bit mixed up and conflicted and confused, and she should feel guilty, I mean, the ending of the movie, it's her fault as much as anyone else's. The culture or society is like, she's in a tough spot. I don't think Mobile Homes is the movie that's you're not gonna leave singing along to ABBA. It's definitely can be a bit of a downer. But I do think it offers up an interesting sort of snippet into the life of these itinerants just traversing the land, and the situation that they fall into is not an easy one. So I like the idea of a female character who makes pretty ropey choices, and then has to deal with the ramifications of those.
And that's why the script, because of those reasons, hit your sweet spot of...
I guess so, and it's hard to say why something speaks to you at a certain point in your life, because the fact that it was going to be filmed during the Arctic vortex in Canada when the temperature was going to be like below freezing was not a big draw. But for some reason I was like, I have to, I could sort of sense her and the kinetic nature of the film too, like they're always on the move and on the go, and maybe I just wanted to be close to that again. And then I met Vladimir, who was so passionate, and we seemed to like the same kind of movies, which is always a good sign. And then one of my best friends, Callum Turner, came on, so it was a neat setup.
Did you meet him on Green Room?
Yeah,
Nice.
we met on Green Room and just became super close. I think he's just an extraordinary actor, and he's someone who really you can really go to town with, pushing each other, and you can't embarrass yourself at all with someone like him. He's just he's an extraordinary guy. Yeah.
And how important is that for you to have that kind of person you're playing opposite of? And what happens when there's not that connection there?
Yeah, I mean, because for me that's the best bit. The best bit is being with your other actor, and a lot of the times with projects, I'll be like, oh, I want to work with that person. I want to go do one scene because I want to have that moment with them. But yeah, when the connection's not there, it sucks because you feel it's cheaper. Everything's sort of cheapened, and it can, it sort of maybe takes you out of it in some sense, and that does happen. I think there are actors who really don't like their job out there as much as the other ones.
This movie is going to be like a test for me. I'm on the verge of being very cynical about independent movie distribution and what gets the oxygen.
Yes.
And making this show this year, I've had to watch more movies that I wouldn't have normally seen.
Yeah.
And smaller movies, and I'm just astonished at the quality of some of these movies and how they disappear.
Totally.
And it's really upsetting. And then I just saw a movie which I will not name that is going to be talked about into the infinity that doesn't deserve it. I mean, to me,
Right.
And I don't know what could be done about it. I don't know what is the answer, but I like to think that, whatever, the cream rises to the top, but that's not necessarily
Well, it's so
true.
funny, isn't it? Because it's like it's understanding that the Mike Nichols, Bob Rafflesons, the Hal Ashbys, that sort of type of filmmaking. It always felt like the middle, didn't it? It wasn't like micro budget, and it wasn't massive studio pictures. I guess some of those must have been studio pictures, but they didn't feel that way.
That's
they
right.
Felt
Back
like,
when studios didn't, in the early 70s, it
Yeah.
didn't feel like studio pictures.
all of those films. But I agree with you. I mean, again, it's sort of like Kelly Reichardt is a massive hero of mine, and the Zellner brothers and the Safdie brothers, actually, I guess, are now really established, aren't they, because of Good Time. But there are these filmmakers where you're just like, wow, like Kelly Reichardt, to me, every film she makes, slightly different, extraordinary stories, just unbelievable stories for women. But I wonder if I said, my mum actually is now pretty versed in movies because we watch a lot together, but if I was to mention actually Kelly Reichardt to one of her friends, they'd be like, who's that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is just shocking to me because it's
And
it's
does,
hard.
Does this make you, when you're trying to select things, does this just get depressing after a while? Of like thinking like this, because like this movie is like your work in it. I hope it gets recognized this year. But it's there's other people's work in it, and the film itself. I mean, and just the ending is like with that, the way that's done.
It's
just
interesting. I wonder at this point too. Sometimes with films, in the same way that, say, with like a Terrence Malick film, you may not be in the final edit. Maybe with independent cinema, you kind of forget that it eventually may come out.
Yeah.
So maybe you kind of, you know, it can be frustrating, but again, it's hard to know what is going to land at a certain point as well, aside from your own selfish ambition to go and do something. But I hear you. I mean, it's kind of it's can be frustrating, but if the alternative is to be a part of something which you just can't stomach or stand behind, then I don't know what's better. But perhaps to be more business savvy is the answer, and do like a Colgate commercial or something to really boost that bankability.
Right. Well, let's talk about stomach aches.
Yes.
Because
I get them all the time.
I'm assuming that you have people that are trying to get you to take some Pepto-Bismol and do some of these big movies.
Yes.
And just deal with it and live with your, right?
Yes.
So what is that struggle like? Do you say bye-bye to those people? Do you try and convert those people? Do you say, I'm never going to be someone that takes those things? I'm sure that, and first of all, are those things offered to you? Or are they trying to make you in the running for some of these?
I'd say a mixture of those. I'd say a mixture of both. And what I will say is I'm a little older now. I think when I started out, I really had this, I did a couple projects that were fun, but I didn't really feel like it was where I was comfy or wanted to learn in that space. So I started doing other projects that really spoke to me and I felt were just kind of, were movies that I liked, to be honest, and really went on sort of a purist, attempted to go down a purist road, but I don't necessarily know if that makes for the best art. Ultimately, I think to be an actor, to make sure that you give yourself and your loved ones a good life, you must sort of at some point lay down the hat and say, well, there's got to be a couple different things you can swim amongst and then go back to where you're safe. And for me, a challenge would be to do something where I have to let go of a lot of things. But it's complicated. I mean, for example, if our wonderful Jeremy Saulnier of Green Room and Blue Ruin and Hold the Dark, if he was to say, hey, I'm going to go do this crazy big whatchamacallit, then of course he'd have 1,000 people lining up to be in it. You know, it depends who's helming something, I think. And one of my favourite actresses is Amy Ryan, who seems to seamlessly move between top-notch theatre, brilliant films, brilliant bigger films, back to, you know, she seems to have a pretty cracking balance. So I think it is possible, but it just is, it's hard to gauge the temperature of some of those things because there's a myth of what they might be like and the reality could be very different.
And do you approach things from a mystical aspect at all? By that I mean, in this case, do you try to gauge a wave and like be like, oh, I have to jump on this because this is a luck wave, and I have to.
Oh right, yes.
You know, it's choose here, choose,
there can
like
be a lot
strike
of
now.
Pressure though in those moments, I think, where people are telling you that, or maybe your ego's telling you that, or your mother, and and it's hard to know. I think ultimately those things come and go, and you know, you can't hold yourself ransom for kind of regret, like, oh, I should have done that thing and been miserable for 10 years filming in the middle of nowhere on something that I hated so that I could now go do my friend's film to play a turtle. You know, like, it's just probably not worth it for all the antidepressants you'd have to be on. But then with moments these days, I mean, it depends. There are things where I just can't. I'm just like, no, that would just be like, huh? And then there are other moments where it's like, go have fun, like, don't take it so seriously. I don't think I actually do take it as seriously as it probably seems I do. You know, like if I just kind of went and had a giggle doing something. And again, there have been things where it's difficult. People necessarily don't think of you for something because they haven't seen you do it yet. But that's because you haven't done it yet. I remember with my first play, this wonderful director called James MacDonald knew I hadn't done theatre, but he gave me a shot, and then that's where you kind of start to wiggle in a new outfit, essentially, a new place. But yeah, I'm sure, I feel like it's a big question for some people, and I know there are other actors out there who are just like, take the job, like, stop overthinking, you know? And if you want to be doing it for a long, long time, then you want to be a little, yeah, you want to consider some things maybe, some now and again.
Do you get annoyed with all these accents you have to do?
No, it's the best. Oh, it's the best. It's like a ticket out of your own identity. I think it's great because I think when I was younger, the American accent was American accent, English accent, Northern English accent. It's not that at all. It's the cadence of a voice. I've met people who grew up in Kentucky, but they got a Chicago accent, or someone who, is from New York, but they sound like they're from California. Like it's finding that person's little nuances to them, and that's a really exciting part of it. I think also finding, like, as I said before, but like the right clothes that you're going to move in, that totally changes. Big fan of a good old hair switch up, you know. All of those things are very important, and then you get to sort of find it too.
But is there anyone that ever stumps you, or anyone that you need a coach, anyone that to get it right? Accent-wise.
Oh yeah. I always check in. There's a great woman called Kate Wilson who's based at Juilliard School. I've known her forever, and the best dialect coaches are the ones who aren't even about the dialect. They're about sort of what are they like? You know, you find different parts, and of course it's important not to rely too much on accent. Or these are just, the costumes are great, but they're kind of accessories. If you're just relying on that, then you're half-assing your way around.
What do you do well that nobody's giving you a chance to do?
There are certain things that you yourself don't know if you can do until you get reading or you find something that speaks to you. But it's hard to say. I mean, I think about sort of performances in certain films, and I guess the chance to really play something that's just got everything there. So you don't, perhaps sometimes you can read a script and you feel you have to defend parts of it or make excuses for part of it or cover up things that simply aren't there. I mean, if you look at like Rupert Pupkin in The King of Comedy, it's like that character is like an extraordinary role. I mean, wow, what a picnic to go and play that, and to be that proud and that humiliated and shameful and funny and melancholy, and but still want it, and ambitious, and just what a beautiful performance. I mean, it's just knocks me out whenever I see that. Like Frances McDormand, you know, anything she does, especially her last film, there's such a sense of that balance. I think I'd love to get a chance to play more conflict, more like fun. Catherine Hahn, we were just talking about the wonderful Catherine Hahn in Private Life. I mean, she's absolutely brilliant at balancing all of those different little nerves she's having, the character, all these different sort of avenues. You see it all. I think there are roles out there which, you hope one day to get the chance to kind of excavate, I suppose, and not have to settle for some guy's girlfriend. Which is why I always end up killing people in films instead, because that's preferable.
Imogen Poots, thank you.
Thank you so much. That was such a lovely chat.
Back to One is a production of Filmmaker Magazine, which is a publication of IFP, the Independent Filmmaker Project. It's produced by Spencer Rain. Listen to back episodes of this podcast at filmmakermagazine.com or wherever you get your podcasts.